On a Tuesday morning in late October 2023, the air on the old McCullough property outside Abilene held the sharp, clean scent of sawdust and the promise of a hard winter. The new owner, a landscape architect named Elena Rodriguez, was deep in the long process of reclaiming the neglected ranch. Her immediate task that day was structural. The main support beam in the 100-year-old barn had rotted through at its base, threatening the entire building's integrity. Around 11:15 a.m., with the help of 2 local carpenters, she began the careful process of jacking up the barn's central loft floor and removing the compromised 20-foot-long timber. The beam, a massive piece of century-old post oak, was stubborn. It had been fitted with pegs, not nails, and decades of dust and animal nesting had fused it to the surrounding framework. Carpenter Tom Bishop, a man in his 50s, who had worked on dozens of these old structures, used a reciprocating saw to cut through the pegs. As the beam finally loosened, Elena noted something unusual. The bottom 18 inches of the beam, the part that had sat directly on the crumbling limestone foundation, was oddly smooth and rectangular, unlike the hand-hewn, irregular surface of the rest. Running her gloved hand along it, she felt a hairline seam in the wood. It was not a natural crack. It was a perfect, straight line forming a rectangle roughly 12 inches by 4. Tom Bishop knelt beside her. "That ain't worm rot," he said, his West Texas drawl slow with curiosity. He tapped the seam with his knuckle. The sound was different, hollow. Using the tip of his utility knife, he carefully worked at the seam. It was not a join in the timber. It was a meticulously crafted lid, sealed with what appeared to be old animal hide glue and fine, nearly invisible wood dust. After several minutes of careful prying, the rectangular section came free. A dark cavity was revealed within the heart of the beam. Inside, shielded from 75 years of dust, spiders and time, was a small, compact space, and within that space was a time capsule of cloth and metal. Elena reached in, her movements slow, reverent. She extracted a small handbag made of burgundy tapestry fabric, its clasp tarnished black. It was surprisingly heavy. Next came a heart-shaped gold locket on a thin, broken chain. Finally, her fingers brushed against a wide gold band. She held it to the dusty light filtering through the barn's slats. An inscription was engraved inside to Ruth, forever 1942. The 3 of them stood in silence, the hum of a distant truck on the county road the only sound. The objects were pristine, deliberately hidden, and palpably personal. They were not forgotten, they were concealed. Elena Rodriguez knew immediately this was not a random discovery of lost trinkets. She placed everything carefully on a clean rag on her work table and called the Taylor County Sheriff's Office. At 11:47 a.m., the discovery process that followed was a model of cautious, procedural escalation. The first deputy on scene, a 10-year veteran named Garcia, secured the area, treating the barn not as a construction site, but as a potential crime scene. He photographed the hollow beam in situ, the precise orientation of the compartment, the lid's craftsmanship. By 2:20 p.m., Detective Sergeant Mara Vance from the Cold Case Unit had arrived from Abilene. Vance, a methodical woman with 28 years in law enforcement, examined the items with gloved hands. She opened the purse. Inside was a compact with the mirror still intact, a tube of dried-out Tangy natural lipstick, a handkerchief monogrammed with a stylized R, and a small, leather-bound address book. The address book's first page contained a name and address: Ruth McCullough, Rural Road 3, Box 12, Abilene, Texas. The locket opened with some resistance. Inside were 2 tiny black and white photographs, their edges curled. One showed a boy of about 4, his hair neatly combed, wearing a miniature cowboy shirt. The other showed a girl, perhaps 2, with ringlets and a serious expression. The wedding band confirmed the first name, Ruth. Detective Vance's next call was not to forensics, but to the County Historical Archive and the Vital Records Office. By the end of that day, a name from a dusty ledger had been pulled into the sharp, unforgiving light of the present. Ruth Ann McCullough, aged 34, reported missing on September 18, 1948. The location of her disappearance, the West Texas Fairgrounds, Abilene, the barn where her most intimate possessions were found. It stood on land that, in 1948, was owned and operated by her brother-in-law, Carl McCullough. The McCullough Ranch in the late 1940s was not a sprawling empire. but a working spread of 800 acres of hardscrabble land, used for raising beef cattle and breeding quarter horses. It was a place of sweat, dust, and tangible inheritance, run by the McCullough brothers John, the elder, and Carl, 3 years his junior. The post-war boom was reshaping America, but in this corner of Taylor County, life was still dictated by weather, livestock prices, and family reputation. The McCullough name was known, respected, but also quietly noted for its internal tensions. John, by all accounts, was the steady one. He had served in the Army Air Forces as a mechanic, returned home, married his sweetheart Ruth Ann Cole in 1942, and focused on building a family and tending his portion of the ranch. He was a man who found solace in engines and orderly routines. His brother Carl was cut from a different, rougher cloth. He had a deferred agricultural status and never served, a fact that created a subtle but persistent friction in those patriotic years. He managed the more confrontational aspects of ranch life, dealing with creditors, bargaining at auction, and handling disputes over water rights or stray cattle. He was a large man, standing 6'2" and weighing 220 pounds, with a reputation for a fiery temper that could flash from zero to violent in seconds. He was known to have been involved in several bar fights at the Cowboy Inn on the south side of Abilene, and local law suggested he had ties to less savory elements involved in the region's nascent gambling circuits. He never married. He lived in the original ranch house with his aging mother, while John and Ruth had built a smaller but tidy white frame house a half-mile down the same dirt road. Ruth Ann McCullough, at 34, was the calm center of her own small world. She stood 5'4", with a slender but strong build from the physical work of a ranch wife. Her hair was a dark auburn, often kept in soft waves pinned back from her face. Her eyes were hazel. She was not a woman of high society. She was practical. She sewed her children's clothes, preserved vegetables from her garden, and could administer basic veterinary care to a calf. She drove a moss green 1941 Ford Coupe. Her personal indulgence was a subscription to Good Housekeeping magazine, and she kept a small shelf of novels by Daphne du Maurier and Pearl S. Buck. Friends from her church, the First Methodist of Abilene, described her as quiet but not shy, possessing a dry wit and a fierce, protective love for her children Michael, age 4, and Catherine, called Kathy, age 2. Her life was circumscribed by family, church, and the rhythms of the ranch. Her world extended about as far as Abilene, and its annual highlight was the West Texas Fair. The fair in 1948 was a major regional event, a celebration of agriculture and community running from September 13th through the 18th. For ranch families, it was part business, part pleasure. On that final Saturday, September 18th, Ruth planned a special treat for the children. John was occupied with a distressed mare due to foal and told Ruth he would try to join them later. According to his later statements, he kissed her goodbye at around 2 p.m. as she bundled the children into the Ford. She was wearing a simple blue and white check dress with a matching blue sweater, practical white socks, and brown and white saddle shoes. On her left hand was her gold wedding band. Around her neck, tucked under her dress, was the heart locket containing the children's pictures. She carried her burgundy tapestry purse, which contained $3.40 in cash, her lipstick, compact, and her address book. Her last known interaction, before arriving at the fair, was with a neighbor, Mrs. Agnes Poole, who waved her down at the end of the ranch road to return a borrowed pie plate. Agnes later told investigators that Ruth seemed in good spirits, excited for the children to see the prize livestock. Kathy was fussing in the back seat, and Michael was loudly asking about the carnival rides. Ruth laughed, told Agnes she hoped the lines for the Ferris wheel weren't too long, and drove off toward town. That was approximately 2:30 p.m. The fairgrounds were packed. Witnesses placed Ruth and the children at the poultry exhibit around 3:15 p.m., and later near the 4-H prize vegetable displays around 4 p.m. The afternoon sun was warm, at approximately 4:45 p.m. According to multiple witness statements, gathered in the following days, Ruth bought the children a small bag of candied peanuts from a vendor named Samuelson near the grandstand. Michael, hopped up on sugar and excitement, began crying for a ride on the miniature train that looped the fairgrounds. Ruth, perhaps fatigued, perhaps wanting to placate him, agreed. The line was long. Witnesses recall a woman matching Ruth's description, holding a tired, whimpering Kathy on her hip, while trying to keep a grip on Michael's hand as they queued. This was around 5:10 p.m. Here, the timeline becomes critical, and the statements gathered in 1948 become frustratingly vague. A teenage boy working the train loading platform, one Jimmy Ray Hodge, told police he remembered a pretty lady in a blue dress helping her little boy onto a train car. He did not specifically see her get on. The train ride lasted 7 minutes. When it returned, Michael McCullough was alone in his car, crying. Jimmy Ray helped the boy off. He assumed the mother was elsewhere with the younger child. He asked Michael where his mommy was. The 4-year-old, through tears, said only, "She went with Uncle Carl to get Kathy a doll." Jimmy Ray, busy with the next load of passengers, sat the boy on a bench near the ticket booth and told him to wait for his mother. He thought nothing more of it. At approximately 5:40 p.m., the same candied peanut vendor, Samuelson, noticed a small boy sitting alone and crying on the bench. He recognized him as the boy from earlier. He asked the child his name. "Mikey," the boy said. Samuelson, concerned, took the boy to the fairgrounds security office, a small trailer near the main entrance. By 6:15 p.m., a fair security officer had used the loudspeaker system to call for the mother of Michael McCullough to come to the office. No one came. A check of the lost children's log showed no report of a missing boy matching Michael's description. The officer, following procedure, called the Abilene Police Department. Patrolman Dennis Avery arrived at 6:45 p.m. He took a statement from the increasingly distressed Michael, who was now repeating a clearer story. Mommy was holding Kathy. Uncle Carl came. He was mad. He talked to Mommy. He took Kathy. Mommy told me to stay on the train and be a big boy. She said she'd be right back. Avery radioed in a missing persons report for a Mrs. Ruth McCullough and a toddler, Catherine McCullough. He also noted the mention of an Uncle Carl. An officer was dispatched to the McCullough ranch. John McCullough was found in his barn with the newborn foal. He was shocked by the news. He told the officer his brother Carl had left the ranch earlier that afternoon, saying he was going to the fair himself, but John hadn't seen him there. John immediately drove to the fairgrounds. Meanwhile, at 7:20 p.m., a different call came into the APD. A woman had found a little girl, approximately 2 years old, sitting alone on a hay bale near the livestock auction ring, clutching a cheap, stuffed cloth doll. The girl was clean, unharmed, but silent and withdrawn. She matched the description of Catherine McCullough. She was reunited with her father and brother at the security office by 8 p.m. Ruth Ann McCullough was nowhere to be found. Her moss green Ford coupe was located parked in the fair's main dirt lot, undisturbed. Her purse was not in the car. A widespread search of the 200-acre fairgrounds was launched, involving police, fair security, and dozens of volunteers. They checked livestock pens, food stalls, storage sheds, and trash receptacles. They dragged the shallow ornamental pond near the grandstand. Nothing. By midnight, the search was scaled back. The prevailing theory initially was that Ruth had suffered some form of mental break or female hysteria, perhaps wandering away from the fairgrounds and meeting with an accident. But that theory ignored the recovered children, Michael's statement, and the complete lack of any prior history of instability. The investigation, led by Abilene PD Detective Sergeant Raymond Harper, a World War II Navy veteran with a no-nonsense approach, quickly focused on Carl McCullough. Carl was located at the ranch house at 10 p.m. that night by police. He was cooperative but dismissive. He admitted he had gone to the fair. He said he had seen Ruth and the children near the train ride. He said Kathy was crying, and Ruth was looking overwhelmed. He claimed he offered to take Kathy for a walk to calm her down, so Ruth could focus on Michael. He said he walked with Kathy for about 20 minutes, bought her a doll from a carnival game booth, and then, seeing she was falling asleep, returned to the area near the train to give her back to Ruth. He said when he got back, Ruth and Michael were gone. He assumed they had gone home. He said he put the sleepy Kathy on a hay bale near the livestock ring while he went to get a Coca-Cola, and when he returned, she was gone. He said he spent an hour looking for her before giving up and driving home, assuming Ruth had found her. His story was riddled with inconsistencies. The carnival game vendor he claimed sold him the doll had packed up and left the fair by 6 p.m. and could not be corroborated. No one recalled seeing a large, angry-looking man carrying a toddler matching Kathy's description. Most damningly, his timeline did not align with Michael's. Michael insisted his mother was with Uncle Carl when she left him. Carl denied this absolutely. He became belligerent during his second interview, on September 20th, shouting at Detective Harper that his brother's wife was probably shacked up with some salesman, and that he was being framed. Harper had no physical evidence to hold him. Without a body, without a crime scene, and with only the contradictory testimony of a traumatized 4-year-old, the investigation stalled. Carl McCullough was released. Ruth McCullough was classified as a missing person. The case grew cold, fading into local legend and family sorrow. The discovery in the barn beam in 2023 acted like a lightning strike on a dormant tree. Detective Maravance's cold case unit began working 2 parallel investigations, a forensic analysis of the artifacts and the compartment itself, and a historical reinvestigation of every person and detail from 1948. The beam compartment was a masterpiece of concealment. Forensic wood analyst Dr. Aris Thorne from Texas A&M University examined it. He determined the hollow had been carved using a combination of hand augers and chisels, with astonishing precision to avoid weakening the beam's structural integrity. The lid was a separate piece of oak, planed to a perfect fit and glued in place, with a period-appropriate hide glue. Sawdust from the original beam had been mixed with the glue to create a near-seamless seal. Most tellingly, microscopic analysis of the interior revealed trace amounts of a fabric fiber that matched the lining of Ruth's purse, and a single-minute strand of auburn hair, 37 millimeters long, consistent with Ruth's hair color and length as seen in photographs. The compartment had been created specifically to hold these items, and it had been done by someone with significant woodworking skill and access to the barn. Carl McCullough, according to former ranch hands located by Vance's team, was a competent carpenter, known for building sturdy fences and repairing barn structures. The artifacts told their own stories. The wedding band and locket confirmed the identity of the owner. The purse's contents were inventoried. The address book contained 32 names, mostly local friends, family, and merchants. One page, however, had been carefully torn out. Using electrostatic detection apparatus, a forensic document examiner was able to recover slight indentations on the underlying page. The impressions revealed a list in Ruth's neat, looping cursive, money for, Fleur, sugar, and then, more ominously, ask C, about ledger and bank, talk to J. The final line was a single word, afraid. The historical reinvestigation yielded new, critical context. Vance's team, sifting through archived bank records and land deeds with modern data correlation tools, uncovered a financial situation ripe for conflict. In 1947, John and Carl's father, Walter McCullough, had died. His will left the 800-acre ranch, jointly to his 2 sons, with a life estate for their mother. However, a codicil, added just 6 months before his death, stated that the ranch house and the 200 acres immediately surrounding it would go solely to Carl, as he was the son who had stayed to care for the parents. The remaining 600 acres were to be split. John had always believed this was unfair, but Ruth, according to letters to a friend discovered in an attic by the friend's granddaughter, had urged caution. She worried Carl would become violent if challenged. More explosively, the team found a record of a loan taken out at the First National Bank of Abilene in March of 1948. It was for $5,000, a substantial sum taken out by John and Ruth McCullough, using their house and their share of the land as collateral. The purpose was listed as livestock purchase and breeding stock improvement, but a bank manager's confidential memo, preserved in a separate file, noted a concern the money appeared to be flowing not to a cattle auction, but to cover debts incurred by Carl McCullough at several high-stakes poker games in Odessa. John, it seemed, was bailing out his brother, possibly under duress, possibly to protect the family's collective reputation and credit. Ruth's note, ask C, about ledger and her fear now had a tangible source. She may have discovered the true use of their loan money, the financial jeopardy Carl had placed them in, and the rift it was causing in her marriage. Detective Vance constructed a plausible, evidence-based theory of what happened on September 18, 1948. Ruth, armed with her growing fear and suspicion, perhaps intending to confront Carl away from the ranch, had arranged to meet him at the fair, or he, sensing her as a threat to his financial lifeline and his control over his brother, had sought her out. Their encounter at the train ride was not calm. Michael's memory of his uncle being mad was likely accurate. Carl, a man whose temper was legendary and whose financial security was being questioned by his sister-in-law, saw his anger boil over. In a secluded area of the bustling fairgrounds, perhaps near a storage shed, a livestock chute, or behind a food stall, an argument turned physical. A single, powerful blow from a man of Carl's size could have rendered Ruth unconscious or killed her. Panic would have set in. The fair was crowded. He had 2 young nephews to account for. He took Kathy, both as a means to control the situation and to remove a witness who could cling to her mother. He instructed Ruth, if she was still conscious, or perhaps he simply took the child and told Michael to stay on the train, a command a child would interpret as coming from his mother. He then removed Ruth's body from the fairgrounds. How? The most likely method was in the bed of his own pickup truck, covered by a tarp or fair signage. He would have had a plausible reason to have such materials in his vehicle. He returned to the ranch, likely after dark. John was presumably still out searching or distracted by the police. Carl had hours of solitude. The barn was his domain. He possessed the skill to create the hidden compartment, but he needed to hide the body permanently. A beam compartment could not hold a human remains. Vance's team, using ground-penetrating radar, conducted a survey of the old ranch property, in a grove of mesquite trees a quarter-mile from the barn, in an area that would have been far from the house, even in 1948. The radar detected an anomaly, a disturbance in the soil approximately 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, at a depth of 5 feet. Excavation revealed a forgotten, collapsed cistern, at the bottom, commingled with decades of silt and debris. Forensic anthropologists recovered fragmentary human remains. The skeletal analysis indicated a female, approximately 30 to 40 years of age, of slight stature. A healed fracture in the right ulna matched a childhood break. Ruth's sister recalled her having from a fall off a horse. The cause of death could not be definitively determined from the bones alone, but a perimortem depression fracture on the left parietal bone of the skull was consistent with a blunt force trauma. Carl McCullough had died of a heart attack in 1974, taking his full account to the grave. John McCullough never remarried. He raised Michael and Kathy, sold his portion of the land in the late 1950s, and moved to Dallas, where he worked as a mechanic until his retirement. He died in 1998. Family members told Detective Vance that John became increasingly withdrawn after Ruth's disappearance, and he had a definitive falling out with Carl within a year of the event. They never spoke again. John had often taken long, solitary walks on the property, sometimes toward the mesquite grove. He may have suspected, but without proof, and with the terrifying possibility that his own brother was responsible. He chose silence, a silence that protected his children from a horrific truth and allowed them to have some semblance of a normal life. The aftermath of the discovery brought a painful, belated closure. In the spring of 2024, Ruth Ann McCullough's remains were laid to rest in the Abilene Municipal Cemetery, next to her husband John. A small headstone, paid for by a crowdfunding effort led by her now elderly children and grandchildren, bears her name and the dates of her birth and death. Michael McCullough, a retired school teacher, told reporters, "For 75 years we had a ghost. Now we have a mother to bury." The not knowing was its own kind of prison. This is hard, but it's real. The burgundy purse, the locket, and the wedding band were returned to the family. The hollow beam section is stored as evidence in the Taylor County Sheriff's Office property room, a silent testament to a secret held in wood and time. The West Texas Fair still runs every September in Abilene. The train ride is long gone, replaced by flashier attractions, but the story of the woman who vanished there has now found its ending, not in the spectacle of the midway, but in the dark, crafted hollow of a barn beam and a forgotten cistern, revealing how a moment of rage in a place of joy can echo through generations, and how the very land, when asked the right questions, can sometimes finally give up its answers.